All right. When I arrive to speak with a timeline of 25 minutes with this amount of literature, the staff begin to sweat and worry. So don't worry, I'm going to talk fast. I have a fair amount of things I want to say and do. Okay, so the first thing is to welcome you all. We're delighted to see you all here. We're delighted to see... I don't have to do it? Okay. To see so many of you here, and the quality of the speakers will be self-evident as the day progresses. And I'll have a chance to thank speakers, attendees and organisers later on this afternoon. So, to jump straight into it, heritage values have evolved from a per se phenomenon to a per la gente phenomenon. In other words, excuse me, from an intrinsic self-evident good to one that actually has to demonstrate its value for communities and for society. So that's a little bit about what we are about. The problem, however, is we know this. We know that this evolution in thinking about heritage and in the purpose of heritage and its value and so on has evolved, but not enough other people know this. In particular, not enough other people in the corridors of power. So we are struggling to gain a sort of purchase in political thinking around how heritage can contribute to fixing Ireland and to imagining a better future for us all. Before speaking specifically to the topic of today's conference, I want to mention two unrelated but relevant things that occurred coincidentally last Saturday. The first is a little article that appeared in the Irish Times magazine on page 28, for those of you who might still have it at home, under the heading Design Matters. And it's a short interview with a woman called Denise Rush about her initiative, Sligo Design Week, that she runs with another friend of hers by the name of Muireann Charlton. And I have it here. This is one of the pieces of literature, so I'm going to read it to you. I'm just going to read two short paragraphs from it. And I'm quoting directly from her now. Maybe it's the wild Atlantic way, the surfing culture, a lift in the economy or a stage of life, but I'm now 30 and I've been noticing a lot of my peers coming back to Sligo. My background is in marketing, specifically for the creative and cultural sectors, and I'm also a mentor with the Design and Crafts Council of Ireland. I saw ID, Irish Design 2015, as an opportunity to do something locally. The ID 2015 themes, a sense of place, sustainability, creativity and well-being, they're all reasons why we live in Sligo and or might be drawn back here to live and work. That's what's at the heart of Sligo Week. Sligo Design Week, rather. The second was a chance encounter it's here. The second was a chance encounter. I spoke at the 57th Ross Gray Autumn Conference last weekend, and I met someone who became very exercised by my opening speech, where I described how perilous was the state of heritage in Ireland because of under-resourcing, neglect, in other words. With very close ties to the leading party in government, my new best friend offered to impart a message to the powers that be. So I wrote a letter. It turned out to be a little bit of a missile. Now it focuses a lot on rural Ireland, but I'm going to read you some excerpts from it, because in writing it I felt that I was writing part of what I wanted to say today. So these are excerpts. The contribution the cultural life and the landscape make to well-being, by which I mean mental, physical and spiritual health, is beyond measure. More than that, for generations we have drawn from the way our landscapes, history and culture are imprinted on us and on one another to create an oeuvre of music, literature, drama, dance, art and so on that has quite literally put Ireland on the international stage. Anyone who does not recognise the role that this image of Ireland continues to play in making it the best little country in the world to do business in is misguided at best and at worst missing a huge opportunity. The sad truth, however, is that lack of investment in this sector over the last few years has made it just that, an image. One that we're flogging for all that it's worth without investing in the very people who create it and look after it. Had, for instance, a fraction of the money spent on branding, advertising and excessively signposting the Wild Atlantic Way being directed towards preparing communities along the route to contribute to and benefit from it, or on preparing the landscapes, the habitats and monuments for increased visitor numbers, had a fraction of that money been spent on those things, the initiative would be well on the road to genuine sustainability. The demands being placed on Irish heritage assets, natural and cultural, are greater than ever before. Many of them are already looking dishevelled and unkempt from neglect, proof positive, if such was needed, that this approach is not sustainable. I mention the Wild Atlantic Way only because it's symptomatic of a more fundamental problem of outdated thinking, or no thinking at all, in the corridors of power about the ways that culture, heritage and community can be harnessed in unison for the common good, fiscal, social and environmental. About 400,000 people got involved in Heritage Week activities last year. That is a big public movement. My fear is that they've been categorised as a minority group of heritage anoraks who, because of their interest in the past, a misconception by the way, don't fit the profile of key players in Ireland's economic recovery. Wrong. The very people who participate in Heritage Week, including the people who travel to Ireland because of Heritage Week, belong to a constituency that worldwide has created a rapidly expanding multi-billion euro economy around heritage, culture and the great outdoors. They constitute a mobile, educated demographic in whom European leaders and think tanks are placing more and more store when it comes to forward planning the competitive distinctiveness of Europe. Irish apparatchiks would know this if they attended Council of Europe meetings and participated in these big European conversations, but they don't. The demographic I'm talking about comprises natural entrepreneurs who set the bar high in terms of community values and quality of culture and nature when choosing places to live, work, visit and set up business. The reality is that people participate in Heritage Week because it provides them with an opportunity to proclaim themselves to be stakeholders in this country. It allows them to reconnect with and acclaim the importance of communal values and to show their support and appreciation for the contribution that ordinary people are making to their communities and to quality of life in Ireland. Moreover, increasing numbers of event organisers are using Heritage Week to test out businesses based on the recreational and inspirational dimension of our wonderful landscapes and their rich traditions. If this sounds altogether too utopian, comparisons of tourism and recreational income between the Irish approach and the UK model should enlighten one. Irish tourism contributed 3.5 billion euros to the economy in 2014. Cumbria, which is a little bit bigger than County Galway, generated 2.8 billion euros in 2013. A lot to digest. But to me, 3 points stand out. First, even though there's a huge, largely untapped resource on our doorstep, rural Ireland has not felt the economic recovery. My fear is that there is a belief that this is just the usual time lag between urban and rural Ireland, but there's much more to it than that. Global economics and the way it is driving mass urbanisation has changed the rules of the game to the extent that rural Ireland, not to mention rural Europe, is being sidelined into a cul-de-sac. To remedy this, we need to remove the blind spot that exists around how to invest in the mosaic of resources that are there. This starts with the realisation that these are resources that will not be realised by silver bullet multinational companies. They will be realised by the communities themselves, but only if they are resourced and empowered to do so. People who participate collectively as stakeholders in and stewards of their own landscapes, towns and villages start to look at their own resources in more inventive and entrepreneurial ways. Investing in community projects is investing in the future of rural Ireland. My second point is a warning. Volunteerism is holding Ireland together, particularly rural Ireland. These are typically the same people who get things going, including businesses, in rural communities. Individuals and communities shouldering this burden can no longer be fobbed off with platitudes and claps on the back because the work they are doing is far too essential for that. And they know it. So real support is needed, and it's needed now. And the third point is that such enterprises stand or fall on access to support infrastructure and, more specifically, on the method of delivery of that support. Well-managed, modest grants can turn even the most ambitious visions into reality. If there is a take-home message, it is that politicians and public figures need to wake up to the fact that heritage is not about the past, it's about the present. The Heritage Council measures its success not in terms of the numbers of buildings or artefacts conserved or the number of habitats it has remediated, but in the effect that its grants, advice and practical help have on the lives and livelihoods of communities throughout Ireland. Heritage grants are a proven way to invest in the future of rural Ireland. And the last paragraph of my letter reads, "It's important that we mark great national anniversaries like the centenary of the Easter Rising, but let us not fool ourselves into believing that this is an equivalent type of investment. Modest though they are, the grant schemes that we will have to abandon yet again because of the lack of understanding of their true contribution to socio-economic recovery and well-being are a statement of the measure of government's commitment to rural Ireland." The informality of a letter allows me to be more blunt perhaps than you can face-to-face with people like the Taoiseach, although I have opportunities occasionally to be blunt with him too. My second last point is really important, I think anyway, which is that the Heritage Council measures its success in terms of the effect that its grants, advice and practical help have on the lives and livelihoods of communities throughout Ireland. And this is precisely what we're doing here today. This conference is not about archaeology or the history of towns or even their architectural history. It's about how the unique character of towns, visible in things like older building stock, can be harnessed to give them a future. With so many towns around the country dying on their feet, this is nothing short of an emergency. But it's an emergency that we cannot respond to successfully if we don't understand what's causing the malaise affecting so many Irish towns and shaping people's attitudes about towns. This last bit is important because the solution has got to focus on bringing life, that is, bringing people, real live people, back into towns to live, work, shop and entertain. One of the dozens and dozens of presentations about pretty well every aspect of heritage that I've listened to over my time with the Heritage Council that really stood out was a talk by David Geddes, he of Locum Consulting, an international property consultancy who advise big clients. I have the impression that they deal with really big clients. They can't afford guesswork. They base their advice on research that they themselves do and commission. And he spoke at the launch of the ECORIS report. Michael spoke about the Heritage Council's track record in terms of our interest in this area, and the ECORIS report into the value of the built heritage as a contribution to the Irish economy is very significant. So many of these reports are just languishing on the desks of the department, and we need to change that. So, a few observations that he had to make as follows. Something in the human psyche makes people enjoy being in historic environments. Now, there's all sorts of psychological and philosophical and spiritual reasons why that's the case. Don't need to go into them here. It's an interesting case study in and of itself, but it is real. We can all relate to it. There is a distinction he makes between heritage landmarks, which are visited on their own right, and what he calls heritage environments, which he defines as collections of historic assets, notably townscapes. I'm quoting directly from him now. He said that discussions on the impact of heritage focus typically on landmarks, despite the fact that, and again quoting directly, locum research undertaken for English heritage demonstrated that the impact of heritage environments was at least 10 times greater. So when we're measuring the impact of heritage in terms of pounds, shillings and pence and other rubrics as well, if we focus only on the landmarks, we're missing a phenomenon that is actually 10 times bigger. Primary research studies always show a correlation between the number and nature of heritage assets in places and their appeal as places to live, work and visit. The statistical correlation between number of listed buildings and popularity of a place is 0.71 out of 1, which means it's a correlation of 71%. These are unequivocal figures. Historic environments suit types of commercial, leisure and cultural activity that are not easily otherwise created in towns and cities. They develop organically. It takes time, literally, and, if you like, ontologically, to make a place. And here I paraphrase, understanding and planning to make the most of historic environments in towns is, and now I quote directly, the only known way to overcome the blandness of town centres that people don't like and that keep them away. Again, pretty unequivocal. I keep my notes of David's talk in my copy of the Bacon Report on the fiscal incentives around built heritage in Ireland's towns. The report, I have it here, it has 16 recommendations. I'm going to read 8 of them. They're short, don't worry. Here they go, and they're pretty stark as well. And why they haven't been acted on is a mystery to me. Number 1, a Living Towns initiative should be devised and introduced that would provide allowances against income tax for owner-occupiers and investors with investments in excess of 2% of the building's value. The cut-off limit for investment in restoring of heritage properties that can retain VAT exempt status should be raised from 25% to 65% of their value. The no change of use criterion that's applied in the assessment of VAT on restored buildings should be made discretionary in the case of predefined heritage buildings, with the discretion residing with the local authority in whose area the building exists. Stamp duty on heritage buildings in designated areas should be abolished. The capital gains tax exemption that currently applies to principal private residences should be extended to all heritage properties in defined areas such as architectural conservation areas. The refund of rates on vacant properties should be limited to 50% of the liability, and any outstanding rates liability should remain with the occupier at the time it first arises, rather than transferring to a new tenant or occupier. These incentives should be available in respect of buildings that are eligible to be considered part of the built heritage within predefined areas such as architectural conservation areas. And finally, the 8th one, remember there are 16 of these, the 8th, and it starts with the fact that the eligibility for tax allowances should depend on a statement from the local planning authority that works on a property to which the incentive relates have been undertaken in compliance with the requirements of the local authority conservation officer as set out in appropriate plans and guidance. Absolutely common sense stuff that was published nearly 2 years ago now, again languishing. The most recent piece of research that we have commissioned, this time by Ignite Marketing Research, which is available to you now in your packs, I think, is on public attitudes towards towns, what they like, what the public like and don't like about them. And it too makes for some interesting reading. Acknowledging explicitly the alarming emergence of a two-tier Ireland divided along urban-rural lines. It was said to me a couple of months ago by somebody who admitted or concluded that they lived in a country with a city-state. Now, whether that's a deliberate phenomenon or not, but Dublin has largely become a city-state. I, as a Dubliner, look upon that with a kind of knowing despair. It starts off with that acknowledgement, and what to me is a fairly plaintive statement. which you'll find, I think, on page 2, towns are struggling to understand their destiny. Towns are struggling to understand their identity and define their purpose for people who choose to live there. So towns are struggling. It's literally an identity crisis in our towns. The research itself in Ignite is based on workshops and surveys in New Ross, in County Wexford, and in Longford Town. And the results suggest a ranking of values that concurs with the research I've already quoted and tracks a shift in explicit public awareness of the importance of sense of community and the sorts of things that a town might have that lend themselves to sense of community. In other words, sense of community is now becoming something that is on everybody's lips. And we need to respond to that. Safety, cleanliness, and sense of community are coming out as the top concerns, although it seems to me it's a little bit of apples and oranges in one sense, because to compare safety, cleanliness, and sense of community as though they're all kind of comparable phenomena is probably incorrect in one sense. If you don't have a sense of security, if you don't have a sense of safety, and if you don't have any degree of cleanliness, then it's going to impact on sense of community. We know that that's the case. Yep. The town value matrix, which again is in the report, of what has and hasn't improved in recent years is also important. Again, stand out for me is a diagonal, that is between the upper left and the lower right-hand boxes, namely things that have improved but in fact aren't so important, and things that haven't improved or have worsened but are actually important. Both boxes are actually almost empty. The ones to watch, however, are the loss of banks and Garda stations. I don't know whether post offices were included in the general envelope of things that are called Garda stations. Maybe they were or maybe they weren't, but they should be in there as well. Ignite suggests that, broadly speaking, things that can be gathered under the rubric environmental, that people value and that in the round are improving, are things that we need to focus on. This links to the findings that, contrary to the belief that young people only are drawn to towns, it seems that families look favourably on the prospect of living in nice towns as well. This group, this demographic, the young families, are looking for, above all, cultural and social experiences and quality public spaces, phenomena that they associate with town living. The pub, as the hub of social intercourse, has declined. This is something we all know. It ends with what to me are the two key conclusions, although other people will obviously draw and examine different things from this, that opportunities to involve themselves with local town activities, especially for younger people, where they contribute to the town and see their impact, will strengthen the value of town living, and voluntary and social projects drive real value within town communities. The Heritage Council has, on the basis of all of its thinking, come up with 6 recommendations. They're contained in the policy proposals for Ireland's towns. They will be spoken to by others. The headline ones are the development of a national urban policy, the initiation of the living cities phenomenon, looking at that a lot more closely, putting in place the administrative measures to ease the regulatory burden that currently acts as a deterrent to living over the shop. Looking at the CEDRA report and looking at the actually very smart recommendations contained therein. The monitoring of this activity for its effectiveness. That's terribly important. We're not very good at doing that in Ireland, setting things in motion, but actually then examining whether they're working and tweaking them if they're not, or amplifying them where they really are. And finally, and I think possibly one of the more significant ones in here in terms of real gain and a real initiative that people can grab hold of, is the establishment of a rural towns and villages network. We have a strong track record in the Heritage Council of creating networks that really do work. We believe that it can be achieved in this instance, and we look forward to seeing that happen and look forward to the talks today. Thank you very much.